In August 2023, Health and Human Services, HHS, recommended to the DEA that marijuana be moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 based on the HHS's scientific and medical evaluation. And in May 2024, the DEA proposed a rule that, if finalized, would transfer marijuana to Schedule 3. Currently, the DEA has classified cannabis as Schedule 1. These are substances or chemicals with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. You can see right here from the DEA website that cannabis is considered a Schedule 1 chemical alongside others right here that are very well known for their addictive and potentially dangerous nature as well. And you can see cannabis right here. Under Schedule 2, you can see other chemicals, again, that are considered highly dangerous and highly addictive. And under Schedule 3, you can see these two chemicals as well. And so according to the DEA's current classification, cannabis is considered more dangerous, has the potential for greater abuse, and has less or fewer medical properties than all of those substances, those chemicals that I listed just now. And so there has been somewhat of a debate in the US simply because the current classification that I've just showed you seems somewhat inaccurate and quite out of date. And certainly there have been kind of advances in the field of medical cannabis, which is in a way why a lot of this kind of discussion or debate has kind of come back to the surface. You can see here the FDA approved the first drug derived from marijuana, a purified version of CBD, for kids and adults suffering from two rare forms of epilepsy. The DEA actually then rescheduled Epidiolex, which is a compound found in CBD, and rescheduled it to Schedule 5, which is the lowest restriction classification for controlled substances. And an FDA study actually found that cannabis is beneficial for PTSD treatment as well. For veterans diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and looking for alternative ways to treat it, the first FDA-regulated study on the benefits of smoked cannabis yielded favourable results. And so the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, has already put forward its recommendation to the DEA, suggesting that cannabis should be rescheduled to Schedule 3. Donald Trump had previously put forward his support for the rescheduling of cannabis and had actually announced on his social media platform Truth, it's time to end the needless arrests and incarcerations for adults for small amounts of marijuana for personal use. We must also implement smart regulations for personal use whilst providing access for adults to safe tested product. As president, we will continue to focus on research to unlock the medical uses of marijuana to a Schedule 3 drug. And so with that in mind, at the end of last year, there was a lot of optimism around the cannabis space. Certain cannabis stocks were on the rise simply because of what rescheduling would potentially do from a commercial standpoint for cannabis businesses. But the DEA has said in an update to an agency judge that the marijuana rescheduling process is still on hold. The acting administrator, a guy called Dereck Maltz, who is actually the top decision maker when it comes to federal drug policy enforcement, recently stated, for all the irresponsible politicians trying to get votes by legalizing marijuana, maybe it's time to understand the negative impacts from smoking this crap. People rushing to ERs and increased info on school shooters connected with obsessive pot smoking. Initially, there was a lot of excitement around the potential rescheduling taking place, anticipated to take place earlier this year. Since his appointment and since these statements, a number of cannabis stocks have declined. You know, the likes of Grown Rogue, which I've documented in previous videos, which is a company I really love, and also Glasshouse Brands. So after this strong statement against cannabis by Dereck Maltz, he has actually gone on to state, if there's scientific evidence to support this decision, then so be it. But you've got to let the scientists evaluate it. And so it's not necessarily a backtrack from his strong statement, but it is certainly kind of a little bit of a changing stance, if you like. And I think one of the critical things to consider with all of this is that the appointment of Dereck Maltz by Donald Trump was actually just a short-term appointment. And it was very much focused around Dereck Maltz tackling the fentanyl crisis, which is taking place in America at the moment. This article, Fentanyl and the US Opioid Epidemic, kind of goes into this in a little bit more detail. You can see here it says opioid addiction has become one of the United States' biggest killers, endangering public health, the economy and national security. Fentanyl and other opioids have fueled the worst drug crisis in US history. In recent years, fatal overdose numbers have become defined by illicit fentanyl, an extremely lethal synthetic opioid, with more than 2/3 of overdoses being from this class of drug. And so, like I said, you know, this is kind of my reasoning behind why the kind of cannabis rescheduling has been somewhat put to the back burner, if you like, simply, like I said, because of this epidemic, if you like, of this opioid and fentanyl. Trump wanting to kind of plow all of his resources to tackling this issue so that then they can move forward with this rescheduling of cannabis at a later date. Trump has already nominated Terrance Cole as the new administrator for the DEA, and he will actually take Dereck Maltz's place, who's only just been put into the position of acting DEA administrator. So he's only here, like I said, for a temporary period. As you can see, Terrance Cole is also anti-cannabis from this LinkedIn post where he stated, "Everyone knows my stance on marijuana after 30 plus years in law enforcement, so don't even ask. Hashtag just say no, hashtag disorders, hashtag not legal for distribution." And this is where a lot of the confusion comes, because on one hand, you have Trump in a truth post kind of openly stating that he is an advocate for reform in the cannabis space and the reclassification of cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is President Trump's nominee to lead the US Department of Health and Human Services, also has this more positive stance with cannabis as well, having pledged to legalize cannabis and psychedelics if he was elected during his presidential campaign. And then obviously, you've got this kind of huge contradiction, if you like, with all of these different chemicals that are far more addictive, and in some cases I don't think have any kind of medical value, that when you look at the current classification are looked on more favorably than cannabis. And so on one hand you have Trump and RFK who have kind of stated openly that they are in favourable of the reclassification of cannabis, and certainly in RFK's position legalization of cannabis, but then versus the DEA where you have these two quite powerful individuals who have both openly voiced their concerns and criticisms around the reclassification of cannabis as well.